Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch to participate in this live event with Governor Scott Walker. Governor, welcome.
Great to be with you. Thanks for hosting us, Madison.
Tonight, Governor Walker will share the details of his bold new action plan, The Long Game, with you, our viewers. Here at YAF, we've already set in motion our plan to win not just today's battles, but also the greater war for America's future. And tonight we're going to talk all about the ways you can join us in the fight and help us win. Stick around, and in just a minute I'll tell you how you can ask Governor Walker your questions about this bold plan and hear the answers right here. But first, my name is Madison Habersetzer, and I serve as a program officer with the Young America's Foundation at the Reagan Ranch. Young America's Foundation is committed to ensuring that increasing numbers of young people hear and are inspired by the ideas of individual freedom, a strong national defense, free enterprise, and traditional American values. We accomplish this mission by providing essential seminars, conferences, educational materials, internships, campus lectures, and virtual programs such as tonight's. As fans of YAF, I'm sure you need no introduction to Governor Walker. In fact, I suspect many of you watching tonight share the governor's love for advancing the cause of freedom, and maybe even his boldness in fighting towards that end. Few of us, though, probably have the record that he does, making that dream a reality. The governor's stories about facing down challenges and standing up for freedom in the face of seemingly insurmountable opposition in Wisconsin are powerful. He embodies the very same fearlessness that we work to impart on our students every day all across this country. As the 45th governor of Wisconsin, he stared down 100,000 protesters and stood up to big labor until they backed down. Today our challenges are different, but that same fearless dedication to the cause of freedom will be the solution. In about 20 minutes, I'm going to start asking the governor your questions from the chat boxes live right here. I'll explain more about how we will select those questions soon, but for now, just start dropping your questions in the chat on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. And with that, we'll go ahead and jump into our first question. Governor, why do we need a long game?
Well, Madison, thanks so much for hosting us. A great question to begin with, and thanks everybody for tuning at home or wherever you might be across the country or around the world. It's interesting. In the introductory video that's been running the last couple of days talking about the long game, we mentioned that really America is under siege. We've seen it for years on our college campuses, but it increasingly seeps into our culture. We see it in our communications with the censorship from big tech. And as people look, particularly in this last year with the pushbacks and the riots and all sorts of chaos that we've seen all across America, particularly in places like Kenosha and Madison, Wisconsin, right in my backyard, as well as all across the nation. It's a great reminder that where we're at today didn't happen overnight. The left has really been at this for years, arguably decades, all the way back to Saul Alinsky back in the 1960s. They've had a long-term plan to take over higher education and now K through 12 education, to really sink their roots into all sorts of communications and media and Hollywood and now big tech. And so we've got to counteract that. It's not enough just to be in the battle of the day. And for sure, our students and our programs take on the battles of the day, but we also got to do more than just win the battle. We've got to win the war, the long-term war for the heart and soul of our republic. And that's really what the long game's all about. It's about this idea, how can we take the things that we're talking about today, but think about it far into the future. And I've heard this for years from so many of our supporters who say, this is great what you're doing, but let's take it even further. Let's think ahead for the long game. And that's exactly what this plan does. It's a bold action plan that we're going to talk about tonight.
That's really exciting, thinking the big picture rather than just zooming in on brushstrokes, which are so important, but this is exciting for the greater future of America.
Absolutely.
The long game has some incredibly bold action items that paint a bright picture for the future of Young America's Foundation. What makes the action items in this plan so important to preserving freedom?
Well, folks go, and I hope those of you who tuned in may have already done this, but you go to yaf.org/longgame, easy to remember, yaf.org/longgame. This is what we'll send you, your very own free copy of this. we hope you'll not only get a copy of your own, but pass it on to others, particularly students who want to get engaged in our programs, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, just concerned citizens, or just folks who just want to, you're sitting at home and say, I want to help the cause. We'll send you a copy of this. You can see exactly what we're talking about. And for those who might not be familiar with the work of Young America's Foundation, we'll tell you a little bit about that as well. But the plan itself, it's really an action plan. It's not an initiative. It's not some white paper. This is about a 12-point action plan. And I'll give you a couple examples of things we're talking about. You know, for years, Young America's Foundation, which goes all the way back to William F. Buckley, you had Barry Goldwater involved, you had Ronald Reagan involved long before he was even elected office. We've got a storied history at YF, and we're arguably the largest, most significant youth-based conservative organization in the nation, with roots all across the country. We're in about 2,000 campuses where we provide support to conservative and right-of-center students, and that's great. That's phenomenal. And thanks to a lot of people watching tonight who help us support those efforts. But there's about 4,000 campuses across the country, government-run and private universities and colleges in this country, and that means we're on about half. We need to be on all of them. The left is certainly there. They're not letting up any ground, and we've got to be active and proactive in that regard. And we know, big and small alike, if we get to campuses, if we reach students, not just with chapters and memberships, but with speakers, it makes a phenomenal difference. On top of that, I'd like to get to a point as part of this plan. One of our bullet points is having 1 million more students involved in our programs as participants. I'll give you a great example why that's so important. So about 13 years ago, out at the Reagan Ranch where you're at, Katie Pavlich, a name many of you are familiar with, a best-selling author, an editor over at townhall.com, and someone many of you frequently watch on The Five and other shows on Fox News. Well, Katie, back in 2008, was just a student going to one of our programs. And she says she really didn't know what the future held for her. She went to those programs, heard some of our great conservative speakers as a part of the program at the Reagan Ranch and the Reagan Ranch Center, and it transformed her life. It totally changed where she was headed. Well, we want to make sure we have more opportunities for the future Katie Pavliches out there, and there are similar stories like that. We have some of the best-in-class conferences and seminars and programs across the nation. One of them, in fact, this year for the first time, we're going to have in Houston, Texas. We're moving it out of Washington, D.C., where it historically has been the National Conservative Student Conference. We're going to move it to the free state of Texas. Earlier this year, we had our Freedom Conference in Miami, down in Florida, another state, thanks to Ron DeSantis, who, by the way, is doing a fabulous job. That is not only free, but a great place for us to talk about freedom, really just, not that far away in the shadows of Cuba, where we were able to tell stories of people from Cuba and Venezuela who they and their families came to this great country because of the oppression they saw there under socialism, and the freedom and the opportunity just so uniquely available in these great United States of America. Well, we have these programs. They're life-changing programs. Years ago, one of those actually held in our nation's capital was one where Peter Schweitzer, another award-winning, best-selling author out there. You've heard Clinton Cash, and in total, he's got about 9 different really phenomenal books from a conservative point of view. Well, Peter, again, was one of these students like Katie, who really didn't know exactly where he was headed in the future, came to a Young America's Foundation event, completely changed his perspective, set him on the right course. And when we look at this long game plan, we know that we've got to get to more young people, and we've got to broaden our net. It's not about changing what we do, but rather changing how many people we reach. And one more quick example. I know there's going to be some other great questions, but one more great example is we got to start younger. We started out with Buckley, and I think it was about 100 students that gathered in his home to talk about college students and the problems even back in the early 1960s. In many ways, it's like Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again. We're seeing a lot of the same thing. And we're active on college campuses, and we want to grow on college campuses. But we can't wait to our students in college until we reach out to them. For years, we've had high school conferences, particularly out at the Reagan Ranch, and regional conferences elsewhere. We're going to continue to do that and do that more. But we got to go into junior high and even earlier. I remember back in 1980 when Ronald Reagan was running, I was just 12. And I could just say on a personal level, Ronald Reagan, probably more than anyone other than my parents, for any other adult out there, really transformed my view of the world politically. Not just as a Republican or even as a conservative, but as an optimist. That shining city on the hill, thinking about aspirational goals that weren't about more government, but rather about putting your faith in the American people. That was transformational to me. And I know we've got to start sooner. When I think about my youngest niece is 13, and I think about the last few years and the influences and all that the left's trying to do to capture her attention. And then even in this last year in particular, when I think of how radical groups are even seeping into our elementary schools with the 1619 Project, we had on our tip line, we've got this incredible tip line that exposes all sorts of things with college professors and with critical race theory and all these other things that are happening in colleges and universities and even in our high schools. One of the tips we got was from Ames, Iowa, where a student at Iowa State tipped us off to the local school district, where that district, a public school, a government-run school system, was actually partnering with BLM to do at the beginning of February, so Black History Month, but not to talk about Black history, but to really talk about radical indoctrination. Under the guise of a BLM Week of Action, we exposed and pushed back on the fact that they were coming into that school system from preschool all the way to 12th grade and really indoctrinating them with some wild things. For example, the young kids were getting coloring pages that talked about transgender and the idea that those kids at that young age could pick whether they wanted to be a boy or a girl or somewhere in between. They were told as a part of this curriculum overall that fathers didn't need to be a part of the traditional family. These are radical, radical ideas. But if we don't stop and stand up and defend the things that made this country great, our Judeo-Christian values, if we don't defend when we're under attack from the 1619 Project, the idea that our founders built this unbelievable system, a system that people literally risk their lives to come to legally from around the world every single year, more than any other country out there. We need to defend that, defend the icons like Washington and Jefferson and others who've made this country extraordinary. We can do that. And so part of our tips, part of our action items here are getting, even in those early ages, parents and students the tools they need to counter the actions of the left.
Wow, this is an exciting and ambitious project. And if you're ready to join the long game, head on over to yaf.org/longgame to join us in the fight for freedom. I have one more question here for you, Governor, and then I think we're going to take some questions from our online audience. How is the long game different from the activism Young America's Foundation has been doing for decades?
Well, you really look, again, back to Buckley and Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan back in the early 60s was even an advisory chair for YF at the time. But really, in more recent times, Ron Robinson, such a phenomenal leader. It was his vision to take this transition in leadership and build it into something phenomenal. That's really what the long game has become. But an organization, again, I mentioned Katie and others who've been involved in programs. There's a lot of good examples of folks all the way back, even in the 1980s, fighting communism with the Soviet Union, protesting out in front of their embassy in our nation's capital, pushing back on issue after issue. But again, that's just not enough. It's not that what we're doing is bad. Actually, the students who go through our programs are transformed. We just know we have to reach more because the left is reaching more and more and more people on campus. Those that they haven't reached, those that do think like us, increasingly, particularly in the last year or two, are feeling incredible pressure. I know when I went to college, yeah, we had left-wing professors. This is not anything new. But I think in particular, even the last few years, let alone the last decade, what we're seeing is not just left-wing professors, but radical activists, fellow students and others who are pushing back on students, not just intimidating them for fear of bad grades, but for fear of even speaking out, for somehow that they'd be outcast. And this goes back to our tip line where we find example after example after example where you got a professor that says you can't use Fox News as a source, that somehow it's not legitimate. You can only use CNN or the New York Times. You got other professors who say, if you say you're for President Trump or if you say you're pro-life or you're for the Second Amendment, you're not going to pass the class. Even worse, you see some of the radical pushback from fellow students. We had a case where the student government, one campus that we exposed, took a vote in the student government to defund the campus police. It barely failed, but the students who wanted to pull back on the police presence on the campus went and tried to recall the student senators were for it. And when they were debating it on Zoom, because sadly so many things this last year haven't been open, the students who were being attacked couldn't even speak till the very end. Their voices were drowned out. And so we see this over and over and over again. It's why we've got to be aggressive when it comes to free speech. You know, we've won big, and of all places, the University of California, Berkeley, UC Berkeley of all places, they tried to stop us from effectively bringing a speaker like Ben Shapiro in. We pushed back and won legally, not just getting part of our legal claims back in terms of cost, and they had to pay tens of thousands of dollars. But more importantly, that university, because of their flawed policy, had to pull back on the things that stop conservative voices from being heard on our campus. We have the Constitution on our side. Free speech is ingrained in our nation's Constitution. But if anything, it should be most revered on our college campuses. Sadly, it's the place where it's the most at risk. And we will use the Constitution wherever we need to fight in the court of law. Ideally, we'd like to win in the court of public opinion. And so that's really where the activism is different. It's taking what we've done and supersizing it. There was a movie when I was young called Spinal Tap, and they joked about it. He said, well, what makes you different? He said, we're turning it up to 11. He said, well, everybody else goes to 10. Well, we're turning up to 11. We're supersizing it. We're making it bigger and bolder and really setting out something that's not just about today. It's about looking far into the future to ensure that not just today's students, but generations to come have the freedoms that we hold so dear.
That's really exciting to hear you say that. Often I meet students at our programs who are so excited to be surrounded by other youthful conservatives that they often feel so alone on campus. And so YAF's conferences and student programs are really revolutionary and encouraging. So it's exciting to hear that we're going to be growing that, but then also bringing that conservative community to them on their own campuses. So they don't just have to come to us, but building that network within their own schools across the country.
Well, I would imagine a lot of people watching here, even if they're not students, if you are students, sign up. We'd love to have you. We've got great programs. We're expanding our programs. We're going to have them all over the country. We're going to have more conferences, more opportunities, more speakers. That's all part of the long game. But I also have to imagine there's a lot of other folks who are not students watching, maybe parents, maybe grandparents, maybe just concerned citizens who in many ways feel the same way our students do, who feel that in today's society with what you see on Twitter and Facebook and some of the attempts to silence the voices of those of us who try to be reasonable on the right of center of spectrum, when you see the pushback in society, again, not just on campus, but even in culture, that voices are silenced. We've even seen it in this past week or so, that anytime the left doesn't agree with someone, they immediately lash out. They tried to brand them as racist or sexist or transphobic or Neanderthals, all an attempt to make people feel isolated, to make them feel alone. Mm-hmm. We definitely hear that from our students. I think we hear that from conservatives overall. And that's where the long game's saying, no, enough is enough. We know we're on the right side of history. We know the facts on our side. It's what we saw. You mentioned in the introduction, the challenges we faced back a decade ago in facing down 100,000 protesters. I always laugh saying the Occupy movement didn't start on Wall Street. It started on my street in Madison, Wisconsin. But we faced them down and we prevailed. And I say we, because it wasn't just me. It was a lot of great concerned citizens, overwhelmingly, who call themselves, as I do, conservatives, who stood up with us from all across the country, and we won that battle, and the state and its people are better off because of it. And I know America will be better off when we give the courage to our young people to know they're not alone, that their ideas work, and they will work for America just as they have in the past. But we've got to break through all these efforts to try and stifle that and do that, not just, again, for the moment, but for the long game.
If you're excited about this project and would like to ask the governor some more questions about it, please submit your questions online. We'll ask them live here tonight. So just drop them in the chat box on whatever platform you're using. Our next question, we have a student who asks, I'm just starting middle school. How can I get involved in YAF? Is the long game just for college students?
No, not at all. That's the exciting part, particularly with our membership. And we already see a dramatic increase in memberships from across the country. And so in addition to college conferences and even our high school ones, for middle school students, for preteens in particular, they can sign up as individual members. Again, go to yf.org. We'll get the materials. There's all sorts of exciting dialogue. We'll send them stuff, oftentimes information that's a great offset to maybe what they're hearing from their middle school teachers. And not all of them. Actually, one of our points here as well in the long game is to help conservative and even just objective educators college professors, but also high school and middle school teachers who just want to teach the facts. I remember my son, Matthew, my oldest, who's 26 now, but years ago when he was in high school, he had a great AP government teacher, really dynamic. She was a great teacher, tried to be very fair. You'd go in her classroom and she'd have, political signs up for every possible candidate out there. She brought in speakers, both from the right and the left. But I remember one of the days Matt comes home from school and he's got an assignment, opens up the book that he had, the textbook. And that chapter was all about how they claimed Ronald Reagan's tax cuts brought about the deficits in the 1980s. Well, of course, I looked at that and I said, well, I went in my office and pulled out a different book, actually a book written by one of our YAF speakers. And I said, here, this is a chapter that you need to counter with. Because, of course, anybody who knows about the data, anyone who listened to our good friend Art Laughter, who's also one of our speakers, knows that the tax cuts, both in 81 and 86, actually brought about more revenue into the federal government. It was Tip O'Neill and the liberals in Congress that washed that all away. And so that was a great example of where today a middle school student might say, hey, my textbook, not even just my teacher, but my textbook, I don't think is accurate. Well, we can get her or him more information. We can tell them about, we're creating these new series on some of our American icons, patriots like Washington and Jefferson. In the past, we've done that with documents about Christopher Columbus to counter all the nonsense that's out there about this great leader even before our nation became a country. You look at all these things and you realize young people out there right now, you can go there, we can help you get the information, we can help you get inspired. And one more interesting thing that's in the long game, whether it's middle school or any other age as well, one of the things we found, and we looked at the data, we did the research, we've done extensive polling, and I say that again, hat tip to Ron Robinson for having the foresight to really try and get a finger on the pulse of what young people are thinking. You ask most people in the media today, they think that the young people today get all their information from Twitter. And yeah, we're engaged on Twitter. I was just on before I got on the set, no doubt about that. But that's only a small fraction of where most people get their information from. For young people, it's overwhelmingly YouTube. In fact, we probably got a lot of you watching on YouTube tonight as well. Well, during the year of the pandemic, we've seen a huge spike in the number of people who subscribed to our YouTube channel, YF TV. So if you're on one of the other outlets and you want to be it, go to youtube.com and YF TV, and you can subscribe and get all this great content. But we put speakers like Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Lisa Krause, Rachel Campbell-Duffy, the list goes on and on and on. These great speakers who we've had on campus, thankfully we put them on camera so that we could live stream them during those events, not just to hear the speakers, but I think our students, particularly a middle school student, I would love this. It's the Q&A. It's hearing liberal students, oftentimes teaching assistants and graduate assistants and others, get up and try and attack our speakers, try and do all the things we talked about, try to cancel them out, attack them, call them names and the whole bit, and to see our speakers just systematically go through with the facts. As Ben likes to say, the facts don't care about your feelings. The bottom line is we can give the facts, we can counter that, and I'd like to get to a point as part of our long game, that's one of our action items, is to get to 5 million subscribers, but more importantly, to get to 1 billion views. Because in addition to being on campus, young people of any age, and for that matter, any adult, can tune in and see the content that we put up on our YouTube page and take that out in your battles and discussions wherever you might be, whether it's in school, in the workplace, or just in your neighborhood, or maybe even at home.
If you're liking what you're hearing, head on over to yaf.org/longgame to join the fight. Our next question comes from Aaron, who asks, what do you believe the ultimate goal of the left is? How does the long game help stop them from getting there?
Well, Aaron, that's a great question. And I think if you look at it, particularly again in the last year or two, you see all these things. You see, and this is not hearsay, the organizers of BLM flat out admit they're Marxists. They're trained Marxists. This is not about racial reconciliation. This is taking advantage of circumstances. They've made it abundantly clear. It fits in this larger picture. You think back decades ago, long before even I was born, you had Marxists and leftists in this country and around the world trying to impose their viewpoints. And they did it in other countries. They were not successful here in the United States in large part because in America, we don't live in a class-based society. One of the great things and one of the appeals that people from around the world, and sometimes I think it's really important for our students to hear from people who've come from other countries, who've legally immigrated here. Because those individuals, like one of our speakers at the Freedom Conference, whose family came from Venezuela, they love America. Their families love America. Why? Because they know what it's like in these other countries. We have some of our fellow staff members who've come from old Soviet bloc countries where communism dominated as well. And they love America because they know what it was like to live under oppression. And so you look around the world, the goal back really when this started in many ways back in the 60s was to try and impose Marxism. But because we didn't live, America's not a class-based society, they failed because you couldn't pit one class versus the other. Instead of having envy, for a lot of Americans, we say, oh, you know, the American dream is that person, he or she is successful. If I work hard, if I put my effort in and with a little bit of luck and a lot of determination, I can succeed just like that person did. That's not true in other places in the world, so that's where some of these both communist and socialist tendencies have worked at least temporarily to get in. Over time, the promises of power to the people ultimately lead to poverty and power in the hands of the few elite. But I think what you're seeing here in America now, particularly with things like the so-called critical race theory, is they're trying to replace the class culture based on economic status with one where they divide us up by race, by gender, by sexual preference in ways to pit one group against the other. We see it over and over again, not just on our college campuses, not just in our government, but we're increasingly seeing the buy-in by many even in the corporate world. And we have to push back on this because, again, I think a lot of people missed out when they heard, great speeches by iconic leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because if you remember right, the speech on the Mall, probably one of the greatest speeches, most well-known speeches of all time, I Have a Dream. He talked about having a dream for a lot of different things, but one part was that his children would grow up in a country where they would be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. Sadly, today, we've kind of circled back, but from a different perspective, not from radicals one way, but from radicals the other. And that's why we've got to counter this. This is not just about ridiculous ideas from the left. This is about people who completely want to take power away from the American people, put it in the hands of the elite, change us into a Marxist country, which we know, anyone who studied history knows, that those sorts of policies have failed over and over and over again. And probably the most important lesson in all this comes from, again, great words from Ronald Reagan, who said that freedom's never more than one generation away from extinction. It doesn't get passed on in the bloodstream. It's something you got to stand up and fight for and defend and then pass on to the next generation to do exactly the same thing. Because if you don't, I don't want to live in a country where someday we look back and say, remember what it was like to live in a country that was once free? That's why it's so important to be involved and engaged in the long game.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the recent poll that YAF did, the American Patriotism Index, that talked about how something like only 44% of students believe that America is exceptional. And how do you think we as YAF are going to proceed helping inspire students with America's founding principles going forward?
Well, we have to reinstitutionalize patriotism. It's something that Reagan himself, President Reagan, warned us in his farewell address 32 years ago. I remember as a kid, before President Reagan, the country was in, as defined at the time, a malaise. We had oil embargoes, we had gas lines, we had high inflation. And sadly, one of those people I knew, Kevin Hermaning, a Marine from Oak Creek, Wisconsin, was one of the hostages held for 444 days in Iran. Remember, in front of our house, we had a big old tree with a yellow ribbon around it for more than a year because of people like Kevin and the other hostages. Ronald Reagan came in and the hostages literally were released that day. He took action. He took big, bold action that changed things in terms of the economy. 40 years ago, this coming August, we'll celebrate the 40th anniversary of that first, at the time, largest tax cut in the history of America. That transformed the economy way beyond his time as president into Bush's and even Clinton's time in office. And then from a security standpoint, not only here in America, but around the world, that changed as well. This president reestablished a sense of pride in America. I know as a young man, I was proud to be an American again. But he warned us at the end of his 8 years. He celebrated all that change and all that not just he did, but the American public did to make that happen. But as he often did, he wisely had a vision. He was very prophetic. He looked ahead and gave Americans a warning that as great as that was, he said he worried, and this is particularly interesting when you think about, and my kids are at the end of the millennial generation, but you think about that age group and how those poll numbers really reflect even more so amongst millennials than even Gen Z, which are college and high school students. But this feeling that they're not feeling as I did, and maybe our parents' generation did growing up, about love for country. But that was because Reagan pointed out, he said parents back in 1989 were afraid to reinstitutionalize American exceptionalism, to have a love for country. And he said we should go back to teaching basic American history and shared community rituals, things that we did as a nation. And so what are we going to do? That's part of the long game. It's tying in even to helping, even at the youngest of ages, getting those parents information about what made our founding principles so good, and countering the nonsense that we hear from the 1619 Project, talking about our iconic American heroes, talking about it not only with materials for elementary school students, but for middle school, reestablish that in high school, and even through college. The good news is, as much as those polls were disturbing with those numbers, the flip side is, if you ask college and even high school students today, in that same poll, we did find that if you just, without identifying what it means, you say, do you think in America that if you work hard, you can succeed in this country? The answer was overwhelmingly yes. And then what I really loved, it took it a step further and said, if you came here from another country and you work hard, can you succeed? And the answer was, thankfully, surprisingly, but thankfully, was yes. What that means is they believe in the American dream. They just don't call it that. And so much of what we see in society today is, I think, the left has dominated the battle over words, over semantics. So they've made capitalism sound like some awful thing that's like an ominous Death Star out there. But if you ask a student about entrepreneurship, if you say, hey, would you like to start your own business someday? Oh, their eyes light up. They'd love to. Well, they said, well, do you want government in the way of doing it? Do you want the heavy hand of government at the local, state, and federal level dictating what you can do and your partners and the people you work? Oh, well, no. Well, so it's all part of the long game as well, is finding new and unique ways to communicate the same core principles in ways that are relatable to people in college and high school and younger today.
Well, that's so encouraging and hopeful to hear.
Yeah.
We're going to take another question from an online viewer, but if you're watching live, there's still time to get your questions in. So go ahead and drop those in the chat box, and hopefully we can take some questions from you tonight. Alex asks, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to the spread of conservative ideas today?
Oh, it's definitely the cancel culture. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the left doesn't want to debate. They don't want to have the battle of ideas because they know they'll lose. We've seen time and time and time again, not only here but around the world, that those of us who put our faith in freedom, which means we believe in the people, we believe that as long as you don't hurt the health and safety of your neighbor, go and do your own thing, live your own life, pursue your dream. We believe in you. They believe in the government. Now, those on the left, I said they're often like, a taxi cab versus an Uber or Lyft. Taxis are highly regulated, highly restricted. There's usually a big fee involved with it. They box people off once they get in there. Well, that's because it's kind of like socialism. Those who are left of center, they put their faith in the government because they want to tell you what to do, when to do, and how to do it. We don't want to do that as long as you, again, don't protect or don't violate the health and safety of those around you, including those who are yet to be born. You don't do that, we're out of the way. We believe in the individual. They believe in the government. I think the more we share that story, the better off we're going to be. The other part I think is really, really important for us to do. I've said this often, but I'll repeat it 1,000 more times this week if I can. And that is, those of us on the right think and talk with our head. The left thinks and talks with their heart. We should never concede the logic of our head, but we've got to find better and more ways to speak from the heart. I found when I was governor, when I would tell personal stories that were based on factual arguments, it was so much more compelling. I mean, heck, the greatest teacher in the history of the world told parables, so it makes sense that stories make sense as long as they're based on fact. And sometimes you can even include humor along with it. President Reagan was a genius at that. He would tell unbelievably good jokes, sometimes self-deprecating, but oftentimes they were jokes that actually fit into the larger point he was trying to make going forward. So, we should be happy warriors. We got a great story to tell. We love this country. We love America. We love the opportunities it's given to us. We particularly love it if we've come here from somewhere else. And we want, I think as conservatives, we want our families to do better than we did, our children, and someday our children's children. But we also want the same for our neighbor. And that's why it's just so interesting to see the contrast between the left and the right. We've got a great story to tell. We should not be afraid to do it. That's part of the reason why the long game is so important, because we break those barriers down. We reach more students, not just with a conservative message, but then reinforce to them, give them the facts to counter the lies. Give them the strength to understand that they're not alone and it's okay to share their ideas with others. The more we do that, the better off we're going to be. The more we're ultimately going to win. Not just the battle today, we're going to win the war for the heart and soul of this great nation.
We have kind of a fun question here for you from a viewer who asks, what was it like appearing on Verdict with Ted Cruz today?
It was a ton of fun. Although today I'm thinking I don't have a cactus behind me, so it's a little bit different than the set there. But Michael Knowles is just a genius. Ted Cruz and I have known each other for years. In fact, actually a funny story about Ted. We were kidding about it on the set. A couple years ago when he was visiting the state of Wisconsin, his whole family was with him. We were on a bus tour. He was there 2 days. The first night we were in northern Wisconsin. We stopped by a place. In fact, Sean Duffy, former congressman, husband of Rachel Campbell Duffy, often speaks for us, is on Fox quite a bit. Sean comes on and he brings us some treats. He brought us some deep fried cheese curds. And anybody who's from the Midwest or been to Wisconsin knows there's really those are spectacular. Deep fried cheese curds are like the best. So I said to Ted's, Senator Cruz's youngest daughter, I said, well, tomorrow, we're heading there. Tomorrow we're going to be in Kenosha County where they have a place called Mars Cheese Castle. And there we're going to get cheese curds, but they're fresh. They're not deep fried. And I said, if you really know they're fresh, which they are, they'll squeak. I'm thinking, okay, this is something kind of fun to tell her, something to look forward to. We get out of our vehicle. She looks up at the building that says Mars Cheese Castle. And as only a young kid can do, she said, that's not made out of cheese. So Ted and I were laughing about that, saying it's just funny how literally sometimes a young child can take things. But it's a good eye-opener, not just for that story and that fun episode, but as Senator and Michael Knowles and I were talking about in the Verdict, how we've got to think about how we communicate things, how we get our message across. And so if you get a chance to tune into it, it's a lot of fun. And we've got a great announcement. One of the things we announced for the first time on that episode of The Verdict is that it was so successful to bring the two of them to do The Verdict live at our Freedom Conference at the beginning of February in Miami. We're going to have them at 6 more college campuses all across the nation in the coming year. In fact, the encouragement was to go to their mailbag and tell them where you'd like, if you're on a campus right now, where you'd like them to show up and do The Verdict live on your college campus.
Wow, that's super exciting.
Yeah.
I'm personally very excited about that, and I'm sure many of our YAF activists watching today are. So go ahead, sign up for the long game at yaf.org/longgame to make sure that you're in on all the future fun. A question from Shane, who asks, what should I do if my school doesn't let me start a conservative club? Others have tried and failed before me.
Reach out to us, because we've had great success, not only in college, but we just had a great story in New York State about a young member of ours who was getting pushback for starting a chapter at his high school. And we helped him. We worked not only with us, but we partner. This is one of the key things. There's a lot of great partnership up there. The Alliance Defending Freedom does good work with us on free speech cases. In this case, they helped us with this particular student. And if it takes legal action, again, my preference, I'm not a lawyer, is not to go to court. I want to win in the court of public opinion. But if we need to, we've done it time and time and time again. In fact, if you're going to our website, not only yaf.org/longgame, but go to yaf.org/free speech, because you'll see all the cases we've been working on and many of the big successes that we've had in partnership with entities like Alliance Defending Freedom. But if we need to, we'll take them to court and we'll win, because every student out there, particularly when you see all these crazy groups on the left that high schools, middle schools, and certainly colleges are involved with, and then somehow they try to trip people up with these ridiculous complaints. More often than not, we've found in our legal efforts is particularly at government-run institutions, we're able to do open records, or in one case, the University of Kentucky. It's an interesting case study. Because that's a government-run institution, they have to comply with Open Records or Free Information Act laws in the state. just like other institutions have to do there and across the country. And so we found not just on emails, but they had on an app they were communicating on. We were legally entitled to get the information. And what you saw was they were slow walking the application for them to get in and mocking the very people involved. I think in particular on that campus, they talked about an ad saying, hey, if you believe, if you're a God-fearing, freedom-loving American, come and join us. And in these comments, they were making fun of Jesus. They were making fun of patriotism. They were mocking it all. And we exposed that, not just for those ridiculous and wrong arguments, but in the larger context, because it showed that they were holding bias against our students trying to form a chapter as opposed to other groups out there. So we'll do whatever legally we need to do to make sure that our students and those who are interested can organize. And like I said, we'll partner with others. Sometimes it's with groups like the College Republicans, maybe joining together on a speaker. Sometimes, like in Texas, for example, there was some of the campuses had conservative groups. Sometimes it's with other groups like Students for Life. We love working with them. We have a shared interest in the protection of innocent and precious life. We're not going to do it alone. Again, that's part of the long game is we're in this together. And when it comes to free speech and the right to organize and assemble, we will fight for any conservative student on any campus, whether they're a member of ours or not.
Something that I also think is really fun is when those conservative ideas and conservative groups are challenged on campus, that it actually brings more people to the cause. People flock to the defense of freedom of speech, and it often actually helps encourage the chapter, and they grow overnight because they find that they actually have so much more support than they even knew, and they come out of the woodwork.
We totally found that even personally in my recall years ago, where we had people, I think, in all 50 states come to organize, where they physically came and knocked on doors for us or they made calls. And it was all because of how outrageous the left was, not just in the number of protesters, but in the riots that for a while occurred in our state capitol that didn't happen for hours, it literally happened for weeks. And the death threats. I had threats against me, against my wife. One actually crazily said they were going to gut her like a deer. Others talked about where my kids lived and where my father-in-law and parents lived at the time. They did death threats against some of our lawmakers. But what we found is those things for me, when I would hear that, I remember once I got the threat against my wife while going to the press conference, and frankly, it just ticked me off. It made me firmer in my beliefs. But I also know that a similar thing's true, that when students get attacked, but when we can help them understand they're not alone, when we help provide support, when we bring in partners like Alliance Defending Freedom, or we bring in other groups along the way, we show that they aren't alone, that their ideas are not out on the limb, that more people think like they do, and that we got their back. It's amazing what our students can do and will do if given the chance in the long game to reach even more of them.
Great. We have a question from Mark who asks, as you've said, the left has been playing their own long game for years. With the Biden administration and liberals in charge of most of the government, their plan for America seems to be increasingly radical. What is the biggest threat to freedom from the Biden administration so far?
Well, I think in addition to all the crazy ideas that are out there, I think one of the biggest things that we all have to watch is if there's going to be action taken on the filibuster. Because not only on things like packing the court, which could almost permanently change the course of balance and fairness in terms of our federal government, but even in a more immediate issue that's being debated this week, Ted and I, Senator Cruz and I were talking about this last night as well, that this so-called HR 1, now SB 1, I call it the Crooked Politicians Act, because really what they want to do is consolidate power in Washington in the hands of the few, kind of like what I talked about with socialism, and basically wipe out every reasonable state-based election requirement in the country. In fact, if anything, I think a lot of people after last November feel that there needs to be more measures ensuring election integrity, not less. And so, for example, when I was governor, I was proud to sign something I authored as a lawmaker years before, and I signed it in the law as governor, and that is a requirement that in Wisconsin, you have to have a piece of state-issued state-issued ID, identification card, be it a driver's license or a state-issued card, to be able to vote that has your picture on it. Not a radical idea. You find overwhelming support, not only amongst Republicans and independents, but even a good number of Democrats, not Democrat elected officials, politicians, but Democrat voters or identifying as Democrat voters, think it just makes sense. You got to do it for everything else. I mean, I imagine most people, if you're getting a vaccine, if you're picking up assistance, if you're picking up a check, It just makes sense. We should make it easy to vote but hard to cheat. And so things like that are things, common sense election integrity issues that have been passed over the years across the country, state by state, where elections should be at the state and the local level. Instead, you've got this Crooked Politicians Act they're debating in Washington, where they want to take that power all away and wipe out those laws and put it all under the control of the federal government. Well, that could happen if the filibuster goes away. You could have a Supreme Court where, even though right now you've got a solid 6-3 conservative upholding the Constitution majority, particularly with Justice Amy Coney Barrett, which we were proud to be out front and joining with a lot of other great groups in support of. But if they suddenly add 10 more Supreme Court justices and pack that court in the next few years, that could totally change the balance of things. And again, that should be a good reminder that the left increasingly is all about power. They put their faith in the government, so they focus on that 24/7. They're around the clock. Most of us on the right realize that we care about our small business. You want to run your business, you want to pursue your career. Most importantly, you want to spend time with your family and your friends and your faith. And we don't think about that all the time. And I'm not saying we should change our lives and take away from faith, family, and friends. But we also know that the freedoms we hold dear to do all those things come from living in a country that protects them. And if we let that power slip away, the things we hold to be so important are going to be at great risk. So we've got to be engaged in that.
We had a student program at the Reagan Ranch just last week, about 50 high school students, and we were talking about what conservatism is and what it means to be a conservative. And one student brought up the fact that conservatives believe that our rights come from God rather than the government. And I feel like that is a really key difference for conservatives, and there's so much optimism and hope in that.
Well, right. I mean, freedom, I often say it's endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution, and protected every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States. Those are things that, too many liberals think that they determine the rights, that somehow the government is the arbitrator of that, and that they can be freely adjusted, or that they like one part of the Constitution but not another. It's a whole package. The only way that changes is if, in a very cumbersome, understandably so process, the people, not the politicians, but the people of this country decide to make changes or improvements to that, which has obviously happened. Although, you look at those changes, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, the 19th Amendment, those who freed the slaves, gave voting rights to the slaves, ultimately gave voting rights to women. It's interesting to know that those were all Republican-led Congresses that initiated them, and then the people in the states that ultimately ratified them. It's all the more important that people understand the history of our country and the history of our world to see what really is at play, and to see that in the places where the politicians have thought they determined our rights, those are the places that ultimately failed. We don't want to be one of those countries. We want a republic. As Franklin said, it's a republic if we can keep it. We need to make sure through the long game that we put in place the tools to make sure that Generation Z and the generations to come can keep it, the kind of republic that we know and trust.
We still have a few minutes left, so if you would like to submit a question for Governor Walker, go ahead and drop it in the chat box. Our next question comes from a conservative professor who says, although I'd never be able to admit that I'm a conservative on campus, how can we work with other conservative educators to help push back on the left's stranglehold of our students' education?
Well, a couple of things. Again, one of our 12 points is about propping up and supporting not only conservative, but as I mentioned, even objective professors and teachers, creating a network. One of our very popular speakers, you saw him last week with the students who were at the ranch in the Reagan Ranch Center, Dr. Bert Folsom, is such a dynamo. But engaging people like him, we got a good program idea we're going to announce later this year with Dr. Art Laffer, who of course was an early advisor to Ronald Reagan. The Laffer curve comes from Art. President Trump, to his credit, acknowledged his significant impact and awarded the Medal of Freedom to Dr. Laffer. But he's got a great idea, not only for this larger network we're talking about, but and we'll announce the details, but ways of helping educate early, just entering professors and educators about just basic economics. Because a lot of these mistakes come from people that teachers and professors that just don't understand the details. They just don't have the facts on their side because they're not getting it, often from the School of Education. We're often not seeing it in our colleges, not only in undergraduate, but even graduate level programs. So we've got to counteract that with the facts. And so we're committed to doing that, not only because we know, like the students, they feel outcast, they often feel isolated, but also because we know that for both teachers and professors, ones who really are objective, ones who come from a conservative background and just want to teach the truth, those are incredible mentors. They can have a phenomenal influence on so many young lives, not only in the moment, but far into the future. And so we want to prop them up, not only for their own sake, but because of the unbelievable potential they have to reach young people all across this great country. And we know they're out there. We know they want to do the right thing. We just want to give them the support. Again, that's part of the long game.
Our final question seems appropriate to wrap up our discussion about the long game tonight. Leo asks, is there a conservative comeback coming? Who will lead that battle?
Well, our students and supporters will. That's why we're so hopeful you'll engage us in the long game. Not just get your own, again, you'll get a copy like this. It's all the details, full out pictures, so it's not just all reading, but it talks about all 12 points of our action plan. And we want to have you engage with us. If you're a student, or for that matter, if you got family members who are students or soon to be students, boy, reach out, join with us. We'd love to plug you in. We are going to have record numbers of programs, even with coming off of COVID. Even out at California, the Reagan Ranch and the Reagan Ranch Center, where Comrade Newsom's tried to crack down us, even there, we found a way to have a YAF, a YAF day camp to still get students up to the ranch and experience and learn not just about Reagan, but about the principles he fought for and lived his life defending. We're moving our conferences to places where we're free and open, so we can have great crowds this summer in Texas. We can have gatherings in South Dakota. We were just in Florida. We're going to find a way to get more conferences and more opportunities. But we hope for those of you who might not just be students or have students in mind, that if you're freedom-loving, God-fearing Americans and you want to help us in this fight, you want to join the fight knowing that there's too much at stake, you want to stand up, as Reagan said, and say, here's the warning, we need to take action. You want to help us reach more young people? Again, go to yaf.org/longgame and get your copy. Join us in this battle. We can do it. The people who are going to make that change, per the question, are our students and our supporters who help us reach more students. And that's why I'm here. A lot of people ask me, are you going to run for office? I joke. I said I'm a quarter century younger than Joe Biden, so I got plenty of time. But at least for the next 4 or 5 years, if not longer, I'm committed to this project, to putting in place, to building a solid foundation for this long game plan, because I know, coming from a state like Wisconsin, I know my state, Michigan, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, battleground states like that, will never elect conservatives into the future if we don't have people who understand and appreciate the truth of these principles we talk about. Who don't cherish the freedoms that so many have fought and died for along the way. And so it's my firm commitment to see this through, but I'm not going to do it. I can't do it alone. I need all of you. I need people to help us in the long game, to put in place the students and the leaders and the supporters to make that possible.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us tonight, Governor. It's awesome to hear some of the details of the long game, your optimism for America, and I'm excited to see your leadership throughout this project.
Thanks, Madison. Great to be with you, and great to be with all of you tonight.